Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and in today's video we are going to solve one more very interesting LeetCode question. And this is a very important LeetCode question because this has been asked by these many companies. Yes, in last 2 years almost all the companies have asked this question. So let's see what this question is all about. So this is a medium level question and I really find it straightforward. It is not one of those questions where we need to, just bug our brain with the whole explanation and then come up with an intuition, and then we will be proceeding with some sort of logic. In this question, the problem statement is straightforward. We don't have to bug our brain with anything. We simply have to follow what is written in the problem statement. So in the problem statement, it is clearly written that we are given an array of intervals where interval I represent list of two values, that is start and end. And we have to merge all the overlapping intervals and we have to return an array of all the non-overlapping intervals that cover all the intervals which are in input. So in this example, we can see that these are the intervals and these two intervals are overlapping. So they have merged this interval and made it 1, 6, and the rest of the intervals were non-overlapping, so they added it as it is and returned it in the form of answer. So this was the example. Let's try to understand this question even better with this example. So in this example, we can see that there are 4 intervals. And I have plotted this series of integer where we are going to visualize these intervals to understand the pattern with which we can come up with a solution, right? Firstly, because we need to understand how we are figuring out that these are overlapping and other intervals aren't overlapping. So for that, we need to see what the exact pattern is. So let's firstly draw this interval, that is 1 and 3. So this is the first interval. Second interval is 2 to 6. So this is 2 to 6. Then third interval is 8 to 10. This is 8 to 10. Fourth one is 11 to 13. So these are the 4 intervals. Now if we see these intervals overlapping, these intervals, we can see that these two are overlapping, right? How we came up with this conclusion that these two are overlapping? Because we can see it in the diagram, of course. But in the code, there isn't going to be any diagram that we need to work with. So what is the logic that we can use in order to check that the two intervals are overlapping? So if we see that 3 is the end of one interval and 2 is the starting of other interval, correct? So in this case, we can clearly see that if an end of any interval is greater than the start of next interval, then these two intervals are overlapping. Bear with my handwriting, but I hope you got it what I'm trying to say. So we can simply check the end of any interval or the end of previous interval and the start of current interval, and in this manner we will be able to find out that the two intervals are overlapping. Now the question is how we are going to check for all the intervals and then going to merge it, and then we also have to return it as an answer, correct? So if I have to check for all the overlappings and then I have to merge it, in that case what I can do is I can firstly take this interval, and with this interval I can check all the other intervals, and I will be checking the same condition, that is this one, end is greater than start or not, and if this condition is true, I know that the two intervals are overlapping and I will merge them and append them in my resultant, and then at the end I will be returning this resultant. But if I'm going to follow this approach, I am checking every interval and comparing it with all the rest of the intervals. So in terms of time complexity, this approach is going to cost a lot because it will take around big of n square time complexity. It is going to work, but it is going to work very slowly, which we don't want, and we know that we can do better than this. So if we can do better than this, then what will be the approach? So let's see that approach. So let's see how we can solve this question with a better time complexity. Even the approach is different, the condition is not changed. We have to check the ending of previous interval is greater than the starting of current interval. I hope this is now more clear to you all. So this is the logic that we need to check, and the approach that we are going to take is efficient than the one that we discussed. So what the approach can do? So we know that we need to check two intervals, correct? And we were checking each and every interval and then comparing it with the rest of the intervals in order to satisfy this condition and come up with a merged interval. But as every time, irrespective of what the question is, if there is an input and we are checking the values and comparing them in this manner, where this element is greater than or lesser than, or there is a condition that we need to satisfy, always try and remember that these types of question can be solved with sorting logic. So in this as well, what we are going to do, we are going to apply sorting, because first thing is we need only the ending and the starting of two intervals in order to check whether they are overlapping or not. If the ending and starting are the closest one, it would be easier for us to merge them, and mostly the closest ones are only going to get merged because these are already not overlapping, correct? So if they are being placed at this position in between these two intervals, then what I have to do? I have to again apply that previous logic where I have to search for the interval which will get merged. So if two intervals are overlapping, it would be better to keep them next to each other so that we can check the overlapping condition and merge them. So if we are going to sort our data structure, sort the input data, then we will be able to clearly see the overlapping ones, and then we will be easily able to merge those intervals. So now let's see. We are going to check firstly these two intervals. We can see that the ending value of the previous interval is greater than the starting value of the next interval. So what we are doing, we are saying just merge these two intervals and append it in our result. So firstly what we can do is, firstly I will be inserting this first interval as it is, correct? Because there won't be any resultant in my result. So I will be inserting this. Then when I'm going to check this condition and this condition is going to get satisfied, what I'm saying now, update the end of this interval. Why? Because this interval is having an overlapping, and when the interval is overlapping, we need to check the end of the overlapped interval. So the minimum value will always be this one from where the interval is starting, and the ending will be the maximum of end of the previous and end of the current. So here what we are going to do, we are going to update the end value with the max of 3 and 6, and that will become 1 and 6. So 1, 6 is the merged interval, our first merged interval that we got, and then we are going to insert it back into our resultant. And after that we will be proceeding and checking again. This will become our previous interval now, and this will become our current interval. So is the end of previous interval is greater than the start of next interval? No. So we know that these two intervals are not overlapping. So I am going to check these two intervals now. So this is again previous interval, this is current interval. Again, is end greater than the start? No. So these two are also not overlapping. So these two will be inserted in our result as it is, because these two are not overlapping. So at the end of this traversal, what will be the resultant? Resultant will be 1, 6, 8, 10 and 11, 13. I know it's a bit messy, but question is almost done. So we all can adjust, right? So this is the resultant at the end, and this is the output that we are going to return. Now this approach use the same logic for checking the overlapping, but as we have sorted the data, input data, so now the time complexity will be n log n, correct? Because firstly n log n time will be taken to sort the input data, then we are going to use big O of n time for comparing these intervals and checking this condition and merging as well. So our overall time complexity will be big O of n log n, because this is the dominating value. So we will simply ignore big O of n, and this will be the overall time complexity. Space complexity. Space complexity, if you are going to consider the resultant, then it will be big O of n. And even if not, then it might still be big O of n or log n, depending on the sorting algorithm that you are using. So if you are using Python, Java or C++, then C++ and Java will have big O of log n space, and Python will have big O of n space in worst case scenario, because Python uses dim sort and Java uses other sorting algorithms. So it depends on the language and the function that you are using. So space complexity can be log n or n depending on the function that you are using. So this was the whole explanation, and board is quite messy now. So now let's quickly code this whole solution, and we are going to code this whole solution in two languages, that is Python and Ruby. So firstly let's do it in Python. So firstly we are saying let's first sort our data, input data. So this will sort our input data, then we will define our resultant array, and then we are saying for interval in intervals, what we need to check, if our resultant is empty or result last intervals end value is less than current interval start value. So what this condition is checking? This condition is checking that if the resultant is empty or the intervals are non-overlapping, in that case simply append this interval in our result. But if this condition is not satisfied, then we will come up to else case, where we are updating our result intervals last merged intervals end value with max of its own value firstly. So this will be 1 comma the current intervals end value. I hope this is visible to you all. This is what I wrote. Okay, so after stepping out of this loop, we will be returning our result. So let's try to submit this. So we can see this has been accepted. Now let's quickly code Ruby solution as well. In Ruby as well, we are firstly going to sort our interval, that is ruby.sort, and after this again we are going to do the same thing, define our resultant array. Then we will apply a loop, that is intervals.each do interval, and inside this loop we were firstly checking if our result is empty or result last values ending is less than current values starting. In that case, just append this interval in our result. And if this is not the condition, then inside else, just update results last values end value with result -1 1 comma intervals end value dot max. So it will take max of these two values. After coming out of this loop, simply return result. Now let's submit this as well. Okay, so this is also submitted. So this was the whole question with explanation, and I hope this whole video was helpful for you all. And if it was, then don't forget to like, share and subscribe my channel, and I will soon come up with more such questions. Till then, keep messing with algorithms, and thanks for watching.